HMS Inflexible was an Invincible-class battlecruiser of the British Royal Navy. She was built before World War I and had an active career during the war. She tried to hunt down the German battlecruiser SMS Goeben and the light cruiser SMS Breslau in the Mediterranean Sea when war broke out, and she and her sister ship Invincible sank the German armoured cruisers SMS Scharnhorst and SMS Gneisenau during the Battle of the Falkland Islands. Inflexible bombarded Turkish forts in the Dardanelles in 1915, but was damaged by return fire and struck a mine while maneuvering. She had to be beached to prevent her from sinking, but she was patched up and sent to Malta, and then Gibraltar for more permanent repairs. Transferred to the Grand Fleet afterwards, she damaged the German battlecruiser Lutzow during the Battle of Jutland and watched Invincible explode. She was deemed obsolete after the war and was sold for scrap in 1921. Design. The Invincible-class ships were formerly known as armoured cruisers until 1911, when they were redesignated as battlecruisers by an Admiralty order of 24 November 1911. Unofficially, a number of designations were used until then, including cruiser battleship, dreadnought cruiser, and battlecruiser. General characteristics. Inflexible was significantly larger than her armoured cruiser predecessors of the Minotaur class. She had an overall length of 567 feet, a beam of 78 feet (10.13 in) and a draft of 29 feet (9 in) at deep load. She displaced 17,290 long tons at load and 20,700 long tons at deep load, nearly 3,000 long tons more than the earlier ships. Propulsion. Inflexible had two paired sets of Parsons direct-drive turbines, each of which was housed in a separate engine room and drove an outboard and inboard shaft. The high-pressure head and astern turbines were coupled to the outboard shafts and the low-pressure turbines to the inner shafts. A cruising turbine was also coupled to each inner shaft. These were not used often and were eventually disconnected. Her three-bladed propellers were 10 feet 6 inches in diameter on the inner shafts, while the outer propellers were 9 feet 6 inches in diameter. The turbines were powered by 31 Yarrow water tube boilers in 4 boiler rooms. The turbines were designed to produce a total of 41,000 shaft horsepower, but reached nearly 47,000 shp during her trials in 1908. She was designed for 25 knots, but reached 26.48 knots during trials. Her sister Indomitable maintained an average speed of 25.3 knots for 3 days during a passage of the North Atlantic in August 1908. She carried 3,084 long tons of coal, and an additional 725 long tons of fuel oil that was to be sprayed on the coal to increase its burn rate. At full fuel capacity, she could steam for 3,090 nautical miles at a speed of 10 knots. Armament Inflexible mounted 8 BL 12-inch MKX guns in 4 twin hydraulically powered turrets. Her secondary armament consisted of 16 4-in QFMK3 guns. During 1915, the turret roof guns were transferred to the superstructure and the total number of guns was reduced to 12. All of the remaining guns were enclosed in casemates and given blast shields at the time to better protect the gun crews from weather and enemy action. These guns were replaced by 12 4-inch BLMKIX guns on CPI mountings during 1917. Her anti-aircraft armament consisted of a single QF 3-inch 20 hundredweight AA gun on a high-angle MKI mount at the aft end of the superstructure that was carried from July 1915. a 3-pounder Hotchkiss gun on a high-angle MKIC mounting with a maximum elevation of 60 degrees was fitted in November 1914 and used until August 1917. A 4-inch BL Mk7 on a HAR MKII mount was added in April 1917. 5 18-inch submerged torpedo tubes were fitted on the Invincibles, 2 on each side and 1 in the stern. 14 torpedoes were carried for them. Armor. The armor protection given to the Invincibles was heavier than that of the Minotaurs. The waterline belt measured 6 inches amidships in contrast to the 4 inches belt of the predecessors. The belt was 6 inches thick roughly between the fore and aft 12-inch gun turrets, but was reduced to 4 inches from the fore turret to the bow, but did not extend after the rear turret. The gun turrets and barbades were protected by 7 in of armor, except for the turret roofs which used 3 in of Krupp non-cemented armor. The thickness of the main deck was 1 to 2 in and the lower deck armor was 1.5 to 2.5 in. Mild steel torpedo bulkheads of 2.5-inch thickness were fitted abreast the magazines and shell rooms. After the Battle of Jutland revealed her vulnerability to plunging shellfire, additional armor was added in the area of the magazines and to the turret roofs. The exact thickness is not known, but it was unlikely to be thick as the total amount was less than 100 long tons. Construction. She was authorized in the Naval Expansion Program of 1905 and built at the John Brown and Amp Company shipyard on the Clyde. She was laid down on the 5th of February 1906, launched on the 26th of June 1907, and commissioned on the 20th of October 1908. Early career. Upon commissioning, Inflexible was assigned to the Nor Division of the British Home Fleet. She was the temporary flagship of Admiral of the Fleet Sir Edward Hobart Seymour while in New York for the Hudson-Fulton celebration in September 1909. On the 26th of May 1911, she was in a collision with the battleship Bellerophon that damaged her bow. She was refitted in October to November 1911, where her fore-funnel was also raised by 6 feet to reduce smoke interference with the bridge. World War I. Pursuit of Goeben and Breslau. On the outbreak of World War I, Inflexible was flagship of the Mediterranean Fleet, accompanied by HMS Indefatigable. Under the command of Admiral Sir Archibald Berkeley Milne, she encountered the German battlecruiser Goeben and the light cruiser Breslau on the morning of the 4th of August 1914, headed east after a cursory bombardment of the French Algerian port of Philippeville. But Britain and Germany were not yet at war, so Milne turned to shadow the Germans as they headed back to Messina to recoal. All 3 battlecruisers had problems with the boilers, but Goeben and Breslau were able to break contact and reached Messina by the morning of the 5th. By this time war had been declared after the German invasion of Belgium, but an admiralty order to respect Italian neutrality and stay outside the 6-mile limit from the Italian coast precluded entrance into the passage of the Strait of Messina, where they could observe the port directly. Therefore, Milne stationed Inflexible and Indefatigable at the northern exit of the Strait of Messina, still expecting the Germans to break out to the west where they could attack French troop transports. The light cruiser Gloucester at the southern exit and sent Indomitable to recoal at Bizerte, where she was better positioned to react to a German sortie into the western Mediterranean. The Germans sortied from Messina on the 6th of August and headed east towards Constantinople, trailed by Gloucester. Milne, still expecting Rear Admiral Wilhelm Souchon to turn west, kept the battlecruisers at Malta until shortly after midnight on the 8th of August, when he set sail for Cape Matapana at a leisurely 12 knots, where Goeben had been spotted 8 hours earlier. At 2:30 p.m., he received an incorrect signal from the Admiralty stating that Britain was at war with Austria. War would not be declared until the 12th of August, and the order was countermanded 4 hours later. But Milne followed his standing orders to guard the Adriatic against an Austrian breakout attempt, rather than seek Goeben. Finally, on the 9th of August, Milne was given clear orders to chase Goeben, which had passed Cape Matapan on the 7th, steering northeast. Milne still did not believe that Souchon was heading for the Dardanelles, and so he resolved to guard the exit from the Aegean. Unaware that the Goeben did not intend to come out, Indomitable remained in the Mediterranean to blockade the Dardanelles, but Inflexible was ordered home on the 18th of August. Battle of the Falklands. The West Indies squadron of Rear Admiral Christopher Cradock was destroyed by the German East Asia Squadron commanded by Admiral Graf von Spee during the Battle of Coronel on 1 November 1914. In response, the Admiralty ordered that a squadron be sent to destroy the Germans. The squadron, under the command of Admiral Sir Doveton Sturdy, consisted of Invincible and Inflexible. They departed on the 11th of November and rendezvoused with several other cruisers under Rear Admiral Stoddard at Abrolhos Rocks, off the coast of Brazil on the 26th. They departed the following day and reached Port Stanley on the morning of the 7th of December. Spee, making a leisurely voyage back to the Atlantic, wished to destroy the radio station at Port Stanley and sent the armoured cruiser SMS Gneisenau and the light cruiser Nuremberg to see if the harbour was clear of British warships. On the morning of the 8th of December, they were spotted at 7:30 a.m., although the pre-dreadnought Canopus, grounded in Stanley Harbour to defend the town and its wireless station, did not receive the signal until 7:45. It mattered little because Sturdy was not expecting an engagement and most of his ships were coaling. Furthermore, the armoured cruiser Cornwall and the light cruiser Bristol had one or both of their engines under repair. The armed merchant cruiser Macedonian was patrolling the outer harbour entrance while the armoured cruiser Kent was anchored in the outer harbour, scheduled to relieve the Macedonian at 8 a.m. The Germans were not expecting any resistance, and the first salvo from Canopus's guns at 9:20 caused them to sheer off from the planned bombardment of the wireless station and fall back on Spee's main body. Sturdy's ships did not sortie from the harbour until 9:50, but they could see the retreating German ships on the southwest horizon. The Invincibles, fresh out of dry dock, had a 5 knots advantage over Spee's ships, which all had fouled bottoms that limited the speeds to 20 knots at best. The light cruiser SMS Leipzig was lagging behind the other ships, and Inflexible opened fire on her when the range dropped to 17,500 yards at 12:55 p.m. Invincible opened fire shortly afterwards, and both ships began straddling Leipzig as the range closed to 13,000 yards. At 1:20 Spee ordered his squadron to separate and ordered his light cruisers to turn to the southwest while his armoured cruisers turned to the northeast to cover the retreat. The German ships opened fire first at 1:30 and scored the first hit at 1:44 when SMS Scharnhorst hit Invincible. Although the shell burst harmlessly on the belt armor, both sides fired rapidly during the first half hour of the engagement before Sturdy opened up the range a little to put his ships outside the effective range of the German guns. British gunnery was very poor during this period, scoring only 4 hits out of 210 rounds fired. The primary cause was the smoke from the guns and funnels as the British were downwind of the Germans. SPE turned to the south in the hope of disengaging while the British had the vision obscured, but only opened the range to 17,000 yards before the British saw his course change. This was futile as the British battlecruisers gave chase at 24 knots. 40 minutes later the British opened fire again at 15,000 yards. 8 minutes later SPE turned again to the east to give battle. This time his strategy was to close the range on the British ships so he could bring his 15 cm secondary armament into play. In this he was successful and they were able to open fire at 3 o'clock at maximum elevation. On this course the smoke bothered both sides, but multiple hits were made regardless. Those made by the Germans either failed to detonate or hit in some insignificant area. On the contrary, Gneisenau had her starboard engine room put out of action. Sturdy ordered his ships at 3:15 back across their own wakes to gain the windward advantage. SPE turned to the northwest, as if to attempt to cross the British T, but actually to bring Scharnhorst's undamaged starboard guns to bear, as most of those on his port side were out of action. The British continued to hit Scharnhorst and Gneisenau regularly during this time, and Scharnhorst ceased fire at 4 o'clock before capsizing at 4:17 with no survivors. Gneisenau had been slowed by earlier damage and was battered for another hour and a half by Inflexible and Invincible at ranges down to 4,000 yards. Despite the damage, her crew continued to fire back until she ceased firing at 4:47. Sturdy was ready to order ceasefire at 5:15 when an ammunition hoist was freed up and she made her last shot. The British continued to pound her until 5:50, after her captain had given the order to scuttle her at 5:40. She slowly capsized at 6 o'clock and the British were able to rescue 176 men. She had fired 661 12-inch shells during the battle and had only been hit 3 times because she was often obscured by invincible smoke. Only 1 man was killed and 5 wounded aboard the battlecruisers during the battle. Dardanelles campaign. After the Battle of the Falklands, Inflexible was repaired and refitted at Gibraltar. She arrived at the Dardanelles on the 24th of January 1915, where she replaced Indefatigable as the flagship of the Mediterranean Fleet. She bombarded Turkish fortifications on the 19th of February, the start of the Battle of Gallipoli, to little effect, and again on the 15th of March, with the same results. She was part of the first line of British ships on the 18th of March as they attempted to suppress the Turkish guns so the minefields could be swept. Turkish return fire was heavy and she was hit a number of times. A 15 cm howitzer shell knocked out the left gun of P turret. A 105 mm shell hit the yard above the foretop and killed or wounded everybody within. A heavy shell of unknown size hit her on the port side 6 feet below the waterline, but only dished in the side plating. A 240 mm shell hit the foremast at the same level as the flying bridge and set fire to the navigator's sea cabin. The hit destroyed all the cables and voice pipes running through the foremast to the fire control director. The smoke from the fire was choking the wounded, so she withdrew to turn her head into the wind, and the fire was then quickly put out. She returned to re-engage the Turkish forts and was hit once more with little effect. Later, as she was turning in Erinque Bay, she was seriously damaged by a mine, probably about 100 kilograms in size, that blew a large hole in her starboard bow and flooded the forward torpedo flat, drowning 39 men. She had to be beached at the island of Bozkurt to prevent her sinking, as she had taken in some 1,600 long tons of water, but she was temporarily repaired with a cofferdam over the 30 by 26 feet hole. She sailed to Malta, escorted by Canopus and Talbot on the 6th of April. She nearly foundered when her cofferdam worked loose in heavy weather en route and had to be towed stern first by Canopus for 6 hours while the cofferdam was repaired. She was under repair in Malta until early June before she sailed for home. She reached the UK on the 19th of June, where she joined the 3rd battlecruiser squadron of the Grand Fleet under the command of Rear Admiral H.L.A. Hood. Battle of Jutland at the end of May 1916. The 3rd BCS was temporarily assigned to the Grand Fleet for gunnery practice. On the 30th of May, the entire Grand Fleet, along with Admiral Beatty's battlecruisers, was ordered to sea to prepare for an excursion by the German High Seas Fleet. In order to support Beatty, Admiral Hood took his 3 battlecruisers ahead of the Grand Fleet. At about 2:30 p.m. Invincible intercepted a radio message from the British light cruiser Galatea, attached to Beatty's battlecruiser force, reporting the sighting of 2 enemy cruisers. This was amplified by other reports of 7 enemy ships steering north. Hood interpreted this as an attempt to escape through the Skagerrak and ordered an increase in speed to 22 knots at 3:11 and steered east-southeast to cut off the fleeing ships. 20 minutes later, Invincible intercepted a message from Beatty reporting 5 enemy battlecruisers in sight and later signals reporting that he was engaging the enemy on a southeasterly course. At 4:06, Hood ordered full speed and a course of south-southeast in an attempt to converge on Beatty. At 4:56, with no British ships in sight, Hood requested Beatty's course, position and speed, but never received a reply. Hood continued on course until 5:40 when gunfire was spotted in the direction to which his light cruiser Chester had been dispatched to investigate. Other gunfire flashes. Chester encountered 4 light cruisers of Hipper's 2nd Scouting Group and was badly damaged before Hood turned to investigate and was able to drive the German cruisers away. At 5:53, Invincible opened fire on Wiesbaden and the other 2 Invincibles followed 2 minutes later. The German ships turned for the south after fruitlessly firing torpedoes at 6 o'clock and attempted to find shelter in the mist. As they turned, Invincible hit Wiesbaden in the engine room and knocked out her engines, while Inflexible hit Pillau once. The 2nd Scouting Group was escorted by the light cruiser Regensburg and 31 destroyers of the 2nd and 9th Flotillas and the 12th Half Flotilla, which attacked the 3rd BCS in succession. They were driven off by Hood's remaining light cruiser Canterbury and the 5 destroyers of his escort. In a confused action, the Germans only launched 12 torpedoes and disabled the destroyer Shark with gunfire. Having turned due west to close on Beatty's ships, the Invincibles were broadside to the oncoming torpedoes, but Invincible turned north, while Inflexible and Indomitable turned south to present the narrowest profile to the torpedoes. All the torpedoes missed, although one passed underneath Inflexible without detonating. As Invincible turned north, her helm jammed and she had to come to a stop to fix the problem. But this was quickly done and the squadron reformed heading west. At 6:21, with both Beatty and the Grand Fleet converging on him, Hood turned south to lead Beatty's battlecruisers. Hipper's battlecruisers were 9,000 yards away and the Invincibles almost immediately opened fire on Hipper's flagship, Lutzow, and Erfelinger. Lutzow quickly took 10 hits from Lion, Inflexible and Invincible, including 2 hits below the waterline forward by Invincible that would ultimately doom her. But at 6:30, Invincible abruptly appeared as a clear clear target before Lützow and Erfelinge. The two German ships then fired 3 salvos each at Invincible and sank her in 90 seconds. A 305 mm shell from the third salvo struck the roof of Invincible's midships Q turret, flash detonated the magazines below, and the ship blew up and broke in two, killing all but 6 of her crew of 1,032 officers and men, including Rear Admiral Hood. Inflexible and Indomitable remained in company with Beatty for the rest of the battle. They encountered Hitler's battlecruisers only 10,000 yards away as the sun was setting about 8:19 and opened fire. Seydlitz was hit 5 times before the German battlecruisers were rescued by the appearance of the pre-dreadnought battleships of Rear Admiral Moe, and the British shifted fire to the new threat. 3 of the pre-dreadnoughts were hit before they too were able to turn into the gloom. Post-Jutland career. The loss of 3 battlecruisers at Jutland led to the force being reorganized into 2 squadrons, with Inflexible and Indomitable in the 2nd BCS. However, after Jutland there was little significant naval activity for the Invincibles, other than routine patrolling, thanks to the Kaiser's order that his ships should not be allowed to go to sea unless assured of victory. 2 torpedoes fired by the German U-boat U-65 during one of these patrols on the 19th of August 1916 missed astern. On the 1st of February 1918 she collided with the British submarine HMS Goeben off the Isle of May with minor damage. She was fitted with 2 flying-off ramps fitted above her midships turrets in early 1918. On the 21st of November she was present at Scapa Flow for the surrender of the German High Seas Fleet. The end of the war saw the end for many of the older vessels, not least the 2 remaining Invincible-class ships. Inflexible was paid off to the reserve fleet in January 1919 before being decommissioned on the 31st of March 1920. Chile briefly considered purchasing the ship in 1920, however, the sale did not materialize. She was sold for scrap on the 1st of December 1921, and scrapped in Germany the following year. Mount Inflexible in the Canadian Rockies was named after the battlecruiser in 1917. Bibliography. Burt R.A. British Battleships of World War I. Annapolis, M.D., Naval Institute Press. ISBN 0870218638. Campbell, John. Jutland, An Analysis of the Fighting. New York, Lions Press. ISBN 1-55821-759-2. Gardner, Robert Gray, Randall eds. Conway's All the World's Fighting Ships, 1906 to 1922. Annapolis, Naval Institute Press. ISBN 0851772455-5. Massey, Robert. Castles of Steel, Britain, Germany in the Winning of the Great War. Random House. ISBN 0224040928. Roberts, John. Battlecruisers. Annapolis, M.D., Naval Institute Press. ISBN 1-557500681. Tarrant V.E. Battlecruiser Invincible. The History of the First Battlecruiser, 1909–16. Annapolis, M.D., Naval Institute Press. ISBN 0870211471. For the Royal Navy Logbook for HMS Inflexible, 7th and 8th of December 1914. Transcribed by the Old Weather Project. The Inflexible's ship log and captain's after-action report have been transcribed and are available at this link. For the Royal Navy Logbook for HMS Inflexible, 18th to the 21st of March 1915. Transcribed by the Old Weather Project. The Inflexible's ship log have been transcribed and are available at this link.